Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into a story darker than your fridge at 3 a.m. The surprisingly twisted and oddly hilarious history of heroin. Not the gritty crime drama kind. Not the I'm in a scarf, brooding in a Victorian alley kind. I mean the real, historical kind. A drug that was once celebrated as a miracle cure, tricking doctors, mothers, and even your overly concerned great aunt into thinking it was safe. So before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy wandering through weird, slightly morbid history with me. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always 2 a.m. somewhere. And I like to know who's joining me for this mildly alarming bedtime story. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, and get comfortable. Maybe tuck your toes under a blanket, or just imagine a tiny, judgmental Victorian nurse glaring at you for lounging so casually. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how a medicine could make everyone simultaneously feel invincible and entirely out of control? What did it taste like? And did anyone realize their breakfast biscuits might have a side of euphoria? Could people really think it was safer than aspirin? And who decided that coughs were best treated with something that could ruin lives? Were Victorian parents secretly hoping their children would nap longer? Or was that just a side effect? And now, congratulations. You just woken up in the year 1898 in a world where doctors are prescribing heroin for coughs, colds, and occasionally melancholy. And everyone is just a little too cheerful about it. In 1874, a clever chemist named C.R. Alderwright decided to play with morphine and some acid in a laboratory that smelled vaguely of burnt toast, wet wool, and chemicals you weren't supposed to inhale. You can picture it. Glass beakers lined up like a row of tiny, judgmental soldiers, smoke curling lazily from a Bunsen burner, and Wright squinting at the mixture, as if it were a particularly confusing cup of tea. He had no idea he was about to stumble onto a compound that would later be called diacetylmorphine. Later, in a brilliant marketing move, sold under the catchy and totally harmless sounding name heroin. You step into the lab and immediately notice the air is thick with acrid curiosity. There's a faint hint of burnt sugar, like someone tried to make candy and gave up halfway. The floor is sticky with something unidentifiable, and you probably wouldn't want to know. Beakers clink as Wright pours, swirls, and occasionally tastes, because chemists in the 19th century apparently had a more hands-on approach to experimentation than modern OSHA would ever allow. As you watch, he carefully labels the new substance. Diacetylmorphine, he whispers to himself, like it's a tiny sleeping child he's just invented. There's excitement in his eyes, mixed with the faint terror that maybe he's created something more powerful than he intended. And honestly, he has. The compound is potent, faster acting than morphine, and, crucially, nobody yet realizes just how addictive it can be. Wright steps back, peers at the table, and sighs. This could be useful, he thinks. Useful is the kind of word that in 19th century chemistry means anything from mild headache cure to the beginning of a decades-long public health nightmare. You wander closer to the bottles of morphine he used as a starting point. Their labels are already faded from too many curious hands, warning of addiction that everyone conveniently ignores. He combines the morphine with acetic anhydride, something that sounds like it belongs in a wizard's pantry. And suddenly, magic happens. Or science happens. The beakers hiss and bubble, giving off a smell that reminds you vaguely of caramel and burning rubber. It's oddly comforting and terrifying at the same time. Wright takes a small sample and examines its effects. There's a slight euphoric buzz that makes him lean back in his chair, thinking, yes, this is far better than morphine, definitely not addictive at all. You can hear the tiny voice of irony whispering somewhere in the corner of the lab, but he's too busy admiring the smooth, almost friendly appearance of the chemical. The liquid shimmers like sunlight on honey, the kind you could almost imagine spreading on toast if toast were somehow also going to ruin your life. The world outside the lab is oblivious. Streets are muddy, children are coughing, and doctors are prescribing morphine like it's candy for grown-ups. Right? Blissfully unaware of the chaos his discovery will eventually create, bottles some of the substance and labels it. It's neat, orderly, and deceptive, exactly the way a chemical that would later be marketed as miracle medicine should look. You imagine what it might feel like to be one of the first patients given a tiny, harmless-sounding dose of this new chemical. At first, it soothes coughs, dulls minor pain, and even improves your mood. You feel calm, almost too calm, like the world's troubles are floating away on a gentle river. But there's a catch. As the hours, days, and weeks pass, the river gets narrower, the current stronger, and suddenly you realize you're holding onto a substance that insists on being part of your life forever. And there you are, standing in the 1874 lab, surrounded by the smell of chemicals and the faint trace of burnt toast, watching the birth of something that would go on to confuse doctors, comfort children, and confound society for decades. You can't help but think, how could a single experiment, a few drops of liquid, and the curiosity of one chemist lead to a drug that the world would later both adore and fear? It's a strangely comforting and slightly horrifying thought. The kind you can almost drift to sleep pondering. By 1898, the German pharmaceutical giant Bayer had decided that heroin was going to be their golden child. You step into their polished office, which smells faintly of ink, paper, and a hint of someone's lunch, probably a sausage nobody wanted to eat. The executives are sitting around a heavy oak table, nodding seriously at charts, graphs, and a tiny sample bottle of something that looks harmless but is about to become infamous. They call it a non-addictive morphine substitute. You blink at the words because non-addictive is exactly what everyone would later groan at in hindsight. Somehow, in 1898, this sounded perfectly believable. You imagine the advertising team, quills in hand, scribbling slogans with absolute confidence. Heroin, your cough's best friend. Heroin makes your pain disappear like magic. There's an absurd pride in the room, as if they were inventing not a drug, but a new flavor of chocolate. You wander down the hallway, imagining the employees distributing flyers to apothecaries. The graphics are cheerful, showing mothers handing tiny bottles of heroin to smiling children. Nobody notices that the non-addictive claim is printed in letters so small you could barely read them with a magnifying glass. And even if you did, you might assume it's some sort of decorative font choice rather than an actual warning. In the offices, you notice the executives sipping tea. Perhaps they're proud, perhaps oblivious, or maybe a little of both. They pat themselves on the back for creating a substance that doctors will soon prescribe for everything: coughs, colds, minor injuries, even emotional melancholy. They imagine a world where everyone feels a little lighter, a little happier, and also, unintentionally, a little more dependent on a chemical compound named like a heroic cartoon character. The advertisements roll out across Germany and beyond. You can almost hear the print shops buzzing with the sound of type, ink, and the faint whiff of optimism. Posters show people lounging in armchairs, sipping tea, and smiling as if someone whispered, "Everything's going to be fine." Behind the scenes, the pharmacists refill their shelves, blissfully unaware that these little bottles of miracle medicine will become objects of obsession and anxiety in decades to come. You might wonder what it would feel like to be a doctor at this time. You receive a letter from Bayer praising their latest product. You're instructed to prescribe it liberally. After all, it's non-addictive and will help your patients sleep better and cough less. You scribble notes, slightly confused but trusting the company's reputation. Your office smells faintly of ink and varnish, and you notice a small child waiting outside, clutching their mother's hand and probably about to be handed a tiny vial of euphoric liquid. Heroin quickly becomes the darling of the medical world. In hospitals, children, adults, and the melancholic alike are treated with it, often without anyone fully understanding its long-term effects. It's everywhere, in every medicine cabinet, every doctor's desk, every ad in the papers that promises relief. You imagine stepping onto the streets of Berlin and seeing people carrying their little bottles, feeling comforted, blissful, and completely oblivious to what's coming. And yet, even amid the triumph of marketing, there's a faint undercurrent of irony. The substance that Bayer hails as a miracle is quietly establishing a pattern of dependency. Patients leave their doctor's offices happier, calmer, and unknowingly tethered to a chemical that will gradually demand more and more of their attention. You can almost see the future unfold in miniature, like watching dominoes lined up carefully across a polished floor, each one a small, shiny bottle of heroin. As you step back from the bustling offices and streets, you notice a strange calm settling over the city. People are coughing less, smiling more, and feeling, for the moment, like the world is manageable. And in that calm, you sense the subtle whisper of irony that will echo through history. Sometimes the miracle isn't a cure at all. It's just a very, very persuasive illusion. Imagine it's 1900. You're standing in a sunlit nursery with lace curtains swaying gently in the breeze. There's a faint scent of polished wood, baby powder, and something slightly medicinal in the air. On a small table sits a tiny bottle labeled heroin, safe for children. You blink because, yes, someone actually thought it was a good idea to hand this to a toddler. And not just any toddler. The squirming, wailing, sticky-fingered, utterly uncooperative variety. You watch as a Victorian mother approaches the table. She's wearing a crisp apron dusted with flour, her hair perfectly pinned back, and an expression that says she's tired but determined to keep her household intact. She picks up the bottle with gentle reverence, as if it were a tiny vial of liquid gold. In one hand, she holds a spoon. In the other, the child, who seems to suspect that something is about to go terribly wrong. The mother measures a dose. You notice her eyebrows lift slightly, as though she's asking herself, "This is okay, right?" You know she's trusting the label, trusting the doctor, trusting the promise that this little miracle liquid will calm the child's cough, soothe the teething pain, and improve overall demeanor. She doesn't yet realize that improve overall demeanor often translates into develops a chemical friendship that will linger far longer than any nap. You imagine taking the spoon in your hand. The liquid is thick and sweet, almost like molasses with a whisper of honey. It smells faintly medicinal, but also strangely comforting, as if it could magically make all the world's problems disappear for a few blissful moments. The child opens their mouth reluctantly, suspicious of both the spoon and the suspiciously cheerful aroma. One drop touches the tongue, and for a moment, everything changes. The screaming ceases. The tiny fists relax. A sleepy, euphoric calm spreads across the nursery like sunlight on polished floors. And there it is, the miracle effect. You notice the mother's sigh of relief. She feels like she's been handed not just a bottle of medicine, but a tiny key to patience, sanity, and domestic bliss. She sits back in her rocking chair, the child draped across her lap, and wonders if she should have been prescribing herself some as well. The lines between relief, delight, and the beginnings of dependency blur quietly, almost unnoticed, like shadows stretching at dusk. Outside the nursery window, the world is bustling with carriages, horses, and the faint clatter of street vendors. Inside, the child dreams of colorful patterns, of sugar clouds, of a warm, safe world that is entirely free of teething discomfort or melancholy. The heroin has worked its charm, temporarily at least, but the tiniest hint of irony hovers like a curious ghost. What seems like a harmless aid today may quietly insist on more tomorrow. You notice the nurse or doctor passing by, nodding approvingly at the sight. Excellent choice. They murmur, as if handing over a bottle of euphoria to a child is a perfectly normal professional practice. You can almost hear the faint whisper of future historians sighing, wondering how society collectively agreed that tiny humans should sip a substance that adults would later struggle with immensely. And there's a strange beauty in it, too. The world trying desperately to comfort its youngest members with the tools it has. They didn't know better. They couldn't have known that the gentle miracle they were celebrating would later turn into a subtle, insistent demand for more. You can almost feel the slow march of history in that quiet nursery, the calm before the storm, the fleeting euphoria before reality reasserts itself. You step back, leaving the mother rocking gently, the child calm for the first time that day. The room smells faintly of molasses and medicine, of powdered innocence and small mistakes. Outside, the world moves on, oblivious to the irony. And you think to yourself, Sometimes the most well-intentioned miracles are also the most quietly dangerous. It's a quiet afternoon in a small European town around 1900. You're standing in a cozy apothecary, the smell of herbs, polished wood, and faintly sweet syrup hanging in the air. On the shelves are dozens of tiny bottles labeled Heroin cough syrup, promising relief for coughs, colds, and minor melancholy. You pick one up, feeling its smooth glass between your fingers, and wonder, is this a medicine or a subtle life ruiner in disguise? You watch as a father enters, his coat dusted with coal from the train, carrying a cough-ridden child whose cheeks are flushed and eyes watery. He approaches the counter, greeted by a pharmacist with a gentle smile and slightly suspicious enthusiasm. The pharmacist pours a measured dose, shakes the bottle gently, and hands it over, murmuring, "This will soothe the cough. Very safe, non-addictive." You notice the fine print, practically invisible, warning that it might have other, less desirable effects. But of course, nobody reads it. The child drinks it obediently, the sweet syrup coating the tongue with the comforting thickness of molasses. For a few moments, everything seems perfect. The cough quiets. The child's eyes droop. The parent exhales a sigh of relief that could fill a room. You notice the subtle transformation. The syrup has done exactly what it promised. Peace, calm, and the illusion of control. But there's something else in the air. You can almost see it swirling like a faint, invisible fog. Dependency. The child feels lighter, happier, oddly disoriented, and starts asking, well, not verbally yet, but you sense a quiet, growing attachment. Tomorrow, the cough may return, or maybe it won't, but the craving lingers. The syrup is no longer just medicine. It's a little golden anchor, tying the child to a chemical comfort that has no natural expiration date. You wander through the apothecary, noticing other bottles, heroin for headaches, insomnia, teething, and even minor heartbreaks. The shelves practically hum with potential, offering tiny solutions to every minor inconvenience life could throw at a person. It's comforting in a slightly unnerving way, like a magic wand that occasionally asks for more than you bargained for. Outside, the streets are busy. Women in aprons carry parcels. Men in bowler hats tip their hats to passers-by, and somewhere a horse-drawn carriage clatters over cobblestones. You can almost imagine how normal it all seems. Cough syrup for children, morphine for adults, and society collectively patting itself on the back for being so clever. The irony hangs thick in the air. What was meant to cure minor ailments is quietly setting the stage for something much bigger. And yet, for now, everything is calm. The child snoozes gently in their parents' arms, a tiny bottle of bliss tucked away like a secret treasure. The pharmacist smiles politely, oblivious to the decades of stories that will later unfold around this very bottle. You notice the faint stickiness on the counter from countless previous doses, a silent testimony to human optimism and human error. You step outside into the afternoon sun. The town seems peaceful, even cheerful. But as you watch the small figures moving about their day, you can't help but wonder how many of them are unknowingly walking the fine line between relief and reliance. How many tiny bottles are already planting the seeds of future cravings. It's a quiet, absurd tension, the kind you can almost drift off contemplating while rocking gently in a chair, lulled by the soft smells of syrup and polished wood. And so, for now, the world remains blissfully unaware. People are coughing less, smiling more, and taking comfort in a sweet little bottle that promises calm and quietly demands more than anyone realizes. It's a miracle and a warning, all in one sticky, golden package. You step into a Victorian parlor, sunlight spilling across heavy curtains and polished wooden floors. The scent of freshly baked bread mingles with a faint haze of coal smoke, a reminder that life is both domestic and slightly dangerous. In the corner, a mother straightens her apron, her hands dusted with flour, her hair perfectly pinned, and her expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and quiet panic. She is about to meet her new ally, a tiny bottle of heroin. The mother picks up the vial with cautious optimism. It is small, unassuming, and labeled safe. She glances at the instructions, measured in tiny teaspoons, precise and comforting, and then at her children, who are bouncing, coughing, and mildly chaotic in the way children have always been. You can almost hear her thinking, surely this will help. Surely this won't backfire. Spoiler alert, history says otherwise. She administers a small dose. Immediately, the household changes. The children's coughs soften. The wailing fades into quiet coos. Her tension, a tight coil built up over countless sleepless nights and scolding toddlers, eases ever so slightly. For the first time that day, she breathes. Her shoulders relax. She even allows herself a small, victorious smile. The world is, at least for this moment, calm and under her control. You watch her move around the room. Her steps are lighter, her movements more confident. She pours tea, checks on homework, and even manages a polite conversation with a visiting neighbor, all while the children rest serenely in the background. The heroine has done exactly what it promised. Transformed a house of chaos into a miniature sanctuary of calm. There's magic in the air, if slightly bittersweet magic, like caramel that sticks to your teeth. But as you observe, a faint shadow lingers. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, like the hint of coal smoke at the edge of the room. The mother doesn't notice that the relief she feels comes with strings attached. The more often the children, or even she herself, receives the tiny doses, the more the household begins to rely on it. The calm is beautiful, but quietly insistent. Take me again. You know you want it. You imagine a day in her life. Breakfast served on heavy porcelain plates, a bit of bread, maybe a slice of cheese, and somewhere a drop of liquid that promises happiness. The children nibble obediently, smiles soft and sweet. The mother's nerves, taut as piano wires earlier in the morning, are now like gently stretched silk. And yet, under the surface, the subtle tide of dependence begins to pull quietly. Outside, the world continues in a slow, bustling rhythm. Carriages clatter along cobblestones. Shopkeepers call out, selling their wares with practiced cheer. The mother's parlor is a bubble of quiet euphoria, a pocket of calm in a slightly chaotic world. You can almost hear the faint whisper of history. Everything seems fine for now. And there's something remarkable in this scene, too. The mother isn't careless. She is doing what she believes is best, armed with the tools her society provides. She wants to soothe her children, to create order, to survive another day without losing her mind entirely. The heroine is her accomplice, a small, liquid helper that works wonders while quietly shaping the rhythm of daily life. You take a step back, noticing the soft shadows in the room, the gentle gleam of sunlight on polished floors, the faint stickiness of a syrup that promises both relief and subtle dependence. The mother rocks in her chair, eyes half closed, feeling victorious yet unaware that history is quietly watching her. And you, standing there in the quiet of the parlor, can almost drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity of a world where a tiny vial could make or quietly complicate an entire household. The Victorian mother and her heroine are a delicate paradox, miraculous, comforting, absurdly dangerous, and entirely human. And for now, in this quiet afternoon glow, it all seems perfectly fine. Step into a quiet, lamp-lit doctor's office around the turn of the 20th century. The air smells faintly of polished wood, ink, and something medicinal that could either be comforting or mildly alarming. You see shelves lined with bottles, all meticulously labeled with tiny, precise handwriting. Among them, tiny vials of heroin, looking perfectly harmless, almost like fancy perfume for someone's cough. You watch the doctor move methodically from shelf to desk, pen in hand, scribbling prescriptions with the kind of confidence that comes from believing wholeheartedly in your own expertise. In one hand, he holds a bottle of heroin. In the other, a patient's chart. The patient, a small child, a weary mother, or an exhausted laborer, sits expectantly, hoping for relief. The doctor smiles politely, nodding like a magician about to reveal a trick. "Take this," he says, and you notice the words are both comforting and slightly misleading. He believes, as most physicians of the era did, that this little dose is a gift, a harmless tool, a shortcut to health and calm. And yet, you can almost see the invisible scales tipping slightly. Each prescription is a tiny seed, planting dependency while promising cure. The office smells faintly sweet, like caramel mixed with ink and a trace of something faintly ominous. You notice the patient leaning forward, eyes wide, and for a moment you can almost imagine the rush of calm they will feel, the relief from coughs, colds, minor pain, or even a fleeting sense of existential dread. The doctor hands over the vial, a polite transaction, and for a moment, it seems perfectly ordinary. Step closer, and the absurdity hits you. Doctors are, in a sense, the first drug dealers of the modern age. They don't wear hoodies or lurk in alleyways. They wear waistcoats, spectacles, and carry clipboards. They deliver controlled doses with the kind of precision that makes the whole affair seem scientifically legitimate, even as the long-term consequences quietly lurk in the background. You notice the faint irony hovering in the corners of the room, like a cat that knows more than it lets on. Patients leave the office, small bottles tucked into their pockets, little miracles in glass that promise calm and health. The world outside continues its rhythmic clatter. Carriages over cobblestones, distant bells, the soft murmur of conversation. But inside, the invisible transaction has already begun. One tiny vial, one dose, one moment of relief. And then, slowly, imperceptibly, reliance creeps in. You can imagine the doctor walking down the hall, glancing at a stack of charts, already thinking about the next patient. The process is repetitive, almost soothing in its predictability. Measure, pour, prescribe, smile, repeat. And yet, there's a faint undercurrent of absurdity. A gentle reminder that the line between healer and dealer is thinner than anyone wants to admit. The office smells of faintly sweet medicine, polished wood, and ink-stained papers. You notice a small child dozing on a chair while a parent quietly fills a spoon with syrup, blissfully unaware of the paradox unfolding around them. The doctor moves on, another prescription ready, a tiny gift of calm with a hidden demand for more tomorrow. And as you step back, you realize the gentle absurdity of it all. The very people tasked with healing society are quietly supplying the first generation of heroin users. They are heroes and unwitting conspirators in a story that spans decades, weaving together hope, relief, and subtle dependency in equal measure. You might almost drift to sleep imagining the faint clink of bottles, the rustle of papers, and the quiet tension of history being written one prescription at a time. For now, the office remains calm. Patients leave satisfied. Mothers breathe easier. Children nap peacefully, and the doctor moves on to the next patient, unaware of the full consequences of the tiny vials in his care. The world is orderly, serene, and just slightly absurd. Picture a softly lit apothecary somewhere in Europe at the dawn of the 20th century. The shelves are lined with bottles of morphine, neat, respectable, and a little old-fashioned, like a tweed jacket in a room full of silk scarves. And then, entering stage left, is heroin, shiny, new, and somehow far more exciting, like the rebellious teenager of the family who suddenly inherited all the good china. You step closer, noticing the labels. Morphine is proud, traditional, and clearly meant to convey reliability. Heroin, by contrast, glimmers in its glass vial, promising efficiency, speed, and a modern flair that morphine simply can't compete with. It's faster acting, smoother, and, according to marketing materials, completely non-addictive. You blink because the last claim is technically, gloriously, spectacularly wrong. Doctors begin to line up their allegiances. Some are loyal to morphine, venerable and dependable. Others are seduced by heroin's charm, dazzled by the idea of a superior, miracle alternative. You can almost hear the internal dialogue. Morphine has been reliable. Yes, but heroin? Sleeker, cooler, more impressive at cocktail parties, or well at cough syrup doses. It's subtle, competitive, and utterly human. You wander past a counter where a pharmacist has both vials in front of him. He tilts his head, weighing options like a connoisseur comparing vintage wines. Morphine tastes familiar and safe. Heroin tastes new, promising, and faintly dangerous. The choice isn't just scientific, it's emotional, cultural, and mildly absurd. You can almost hear morphine sighing, muttering, "I was fine, I didn't need this attention," while heroin winks in the sunlight, streaming through the window. Patients are introduced to both in carefully measured doses. Morphine calms, eases pain, and reassures like a dependable friend who has always been there. Heroin, though, adds a certain sparkle. Instant relief, euphoric calm, a feeling of being wrapped in soft velvet. Even if it comes with the quiet, whispering shadow of eventual dependence. You notice how quickly preference forms. People are drawn to the excitement of the new, the efficiency of the shiny new solution. Meanwhile, doctors and pharmacists stand back, observing the tiny human dramas unfolding. A child takes heroin for a cough and drifts into a deep, peaceful sleep. An adult tries morphine and finds it comforting but less glamorous. The room is filled with subtle competition. The old guard versus the flashy newcomer, both aiming to soothe, both oblivious to the long-term consequences patiently waiting in the wings. Outside, the city moves with its usual rhythm. Horse-drawn carriages clattering, children chasing hoops down cobblestone streets, merchants calling out their wares. Inside, the quiet battle continues, played out in vials and spoonfuls of syrup. It's almost theatrical. Morphine, dignified and slow. Heroin, exciting and smooth. Both promise relief. Both whisper comfort. Only one, however, begins quietly nudging the world toward dependence. And yet, there's a strange harmony in this absurd rivalry. The two compounds coexist, serving the needs of society in ways that are simultaneously helpful, ridiculous, and mildly dangerous. You can almost hear them gossiping on the shelf. "She likes me better today. Tomorrow, we'll see." The drama is subtle, domestic, and endlessly fascinating if you happen to be standing there observing history in miniature. As you step back, you notice the faint smells of ink, syrup, and polished wood. The sun glints on glass bottles that promise relief, calm, and minor euphoria, all wrapped in a delicate veil of irony. And in that quiet, you feel the absurdity of human innovation. We created a shiny new solution to outshine the old, not realizing that sometimes the new solution is far more persuasive and far more insistent than anyone could have predicted. Step into a cozy European sitting room around 1900. Light filters softly through lace curtains, dust motes dancing lazily in the beams. The scent of fresh bread mingles with candle wax and a faint hint of whatever the neighbor's cat has been plotting. Newspapers are stacked on the table, open to the latest headlines that scream, in grand, serifed letters, "Heroin, the miracle cure." You pick one up and read through the article. It's full of glowing testimonials. Coughs soothed in minutes, pain relieved without side effects, children sleeping peacefully, adults suddenly cheerful. Every sentence reads like a love letter to the tiny vial of euphoria, a product so perfect it seems almost magical. And the public believes it. Whole towns trust it. Mothers, fathers, and doctors alike nod their heads in approval. You wander past the kitchen, where a father is pouring a measured dose into a tiny spoon. His daughter's cheeks are flushed, her cough relentless. He hesitates briefly, then gives it to her anyway. Instantly, the child's wails soften, replaced by a serene, almost dreamlike calm. You notice the father relax, smiling for the first time that day. It feels like a miracle, and for that moment it is. Outside, people whisper excitedly about the miracle drug. Word spreads quickly through towns, villages, and city streets. Apothecaries are suddenly bustling, shelves stocked with vials that promise not only relief, but a touch of happiness. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief as society embraces the new solution, blissfully unaware of the tiny, creeping shadow that accompanies it. And yet, if you look closely, hints of a darker story emerge. Some patients begin to return for more doses than expected. The cough may vanish, but a quiet longing begins to linger. The advertisements and newspaper articles conveniently omit this subtle truth. It's easy to ignore when the syrup works its gentle magic at first sip. You wander into a small cafe, observing conversations. Mothers nod knowingly to one another. Children nap soundly at their feet. Everyone smiles, praises the miracle, and exchanges tips on the proper dosage. The room is warm, calm, and faintly absurd, a society collectively enchanted by the promise of relief. And you notice the irony hovering gently, like steam above a teacup. What seems miraculous can, if unchecked, become a quietly insistent menace. Even the doctors are caught up in the excitement. They present case studies, write letters to colleagues, and boast about their miraculous successes. They don't yet notice the subtle signs. Patients coming back sooner, doses increasing slightly, dependency quietly forming like frost on the edges of a window pane. Everything seems perfectly fine until it isn't. As you step back, you notice the faint smells of ink, bread, and syrup mingling in the air. The light catches the glass bottles, making them sparkle in a way that seems almost mischievous. The public is convinced, comforted, and slightly dazzled. And you, quietly observing, feel the gentle tension of a society that has discovered a miracle without fully understanding its consequences. It's a delicate, absurd dance. Relief and delight on one hand, dependence quietly tiptoeing on the other. And as the day drifts slowly toward evening, you imagine the townsfolk tucking themselves in a bed, whispering thanks for the miracle, completely unaware of the subtle shadow that history is beginning to trace behind the smiling headlines. In that calm, golden light, you can almost drift off, soothed by the absurdity, irony, and quiet tension of a society in love with a drug that promises everything and quietly asks for more than anyone realizes. It's a quiet morning in a small Victorian home. Sunlight filters softly through lace curtains, illuminating polished floors and faint traces of yesterday's soot. You notice the faint, sweet scent of syrup lingering in the air, like caramelized hope with a shadow of something unspoken. On the table sits a small, unassuming bottle labeled Heroin, safe and soothing. At first glance, it seems perfectly ordinary. You pour a tiny spoonful, unaware that something far more subtle and persistent is about to enter the household. You observe the first signs. A mother measures her child's dose, expecting calm and relief. Indeed, the child coughs less, smiles more, and drifts into a deep, dreamlike sleep. The household exhales, tension easing like steam from a kettle. Everything seems normal, perfect even. And yet, if you look closely, a faint, invisible thread begins to wrap around the family, binding them gently, but insistently, to the tiny golden vial. You wander through the rooms, noticing small, almost imperceptible changes. The father, who once only administered medicine occasionally, now reaches for it a little sooner each day. The child, previously content to play with blocks and dolls, begins asking more frequently for the sweet liquid calm. It's quiet, gradual, almost polite in its intrusion, like a cat slipping under your blankets when you're only half awake. Outside, the world continues in its rhythmic patterns. Horses clip-clopping on cobblestones, merchants calling their wares, and children laughing as they chase hoops. Inside, a silent transformation unfolds. Heroin, once hailed as a miracle, begins to assert itself quietly, demanding attention, care, and, though no one yet notices, loyalty. It's subtle, cunning, and entirely relentless. You step closer to the tiny vial and notice the irony of it all. What was intended to soothe, comfort, and cure now begins to shape behavior. The household relies on it in ways too small to recognize at first. A spoonful for a cough, a drop for minor sadness, a moment of calm for a parent overwhelmed. And slowly, imperceptibly, that reliance becomes more than a habit. It becomes a need. The family moves through their days with a quiet rhythm, guided by the comforting glow of the little bottle. Children nap, parents breathe easier. The house hums with a sense of order restored. But if you look closely, There's a tension beneath the surface, a subtle insistence that the calm cannot last without regular attention. Heroin is no longer merely a helper. It is quietly establishing its presence as an almost invisible master of the household's tempo. You imagine the doctor observing from afar, unaware of the deeper currents forming beneath his careful prescriptions. Patients come and go. Doses are administered with confidence, and the subtle signs of dependency are easy to miss, hidden beneath the smiles, the calm, the seemingly miraculous relief. The world believes in the miracle, blind to the quiet shadow that follows at home. As evening approaches, you notice the soft light falling across the room, illuminating the polished wood and lace curtains. The tiny vial glimmers in the fading sun, a gentle, insistent reminder of the invisible presence it has woven into the family's daily life. And you, quietly observing, feel the paradox of human innovation. A miracle intended to heal is also quietly laying the groundwork for dependence, patience, and subtle tension. It's a delicate, absurd truth. The calm arrives first, like soft music in a dimly lit room. The shadow follows silently, insistent yet gentle, almost polite. And in the quiet of the evening, you can drift off imagining a world both soothed and quietly tethered, lulled by the absurd, persistent dance of a substance that promises relief and quietly asks for more than anyone realizes. Step into a dimly lit parlor somewhere in the early 1900s. The curtains are drawn just enough to let in the soft amber glow of late afternoon sunlight. The scent of polished wood, pipe smoke, and faintly sweet syrup lingers in the air, weaving together a strangely comforting and slightly mischievous atmosphere. On a small table sits a vial of heroin, unassuming but glimmering like a tiny, golden invitation. You notice a young man enter, top hat slightly askew, coat dusted with the day's travel. He carries with him the curiosity of youth, a touch of restlessness, and the faint thrill of forbidden novelty. He pours a small dose into a spoon, watches the syrup shimmer, and then tips it gently to his lips. Almost instantly, a wave of warmth and calm washes over him, like sinking into a velvet armchair on a cold evening while a distant fire crackles nearby. The sensation is subtle yet intoxicating. His mind drifts, worries fade, and the mundane troubles of work, bills, and social expectations momentarily dissolve into the soft haze of euphoria. You notice a faint smile playing at his lips. The world has grown gentler, quieter, as if it respects the tiny dose of heroin in his system. And in that moment, the line between medicine and recreation begins to blur, softly, almost imperceptibly. Outside, the streets hum with life. Children chase hoops, vendors call out their wares, and horse-drawn carriages clatter along cobblestones. Inside the parlor, however, there's a quiet revolution underway. What was once a medicinal tool is now a companion for leisure, a balm for the restless, a tiny golden secret for those seeking calm in the chaos of modern life. You wander through the room, noticing the delicate rituals forming around its use. Friends gather, small doses shared like fine tea or secret chocolate. Conversations drift easily, laughter comes more readily, and the pressures of everyday life are softened. There's a faint absurdity to it all. Society collectively experimenting with a substance that promises relief and pleasure, blissfully unaware of the subtle, insistent thread of dependence quietly threading its way through each encounter. You can imagine the doctor's reactions, should they happen to observe. Some nod knowingly, some frown, unsure whether the line has been crossed. But the public, ever inventive, quickly adapts. Heroin becomes part of social life for those who can afford it, a shared indulgence, a small rebellion cloaked in polite sophistication. The tiny golden vial moves from medicine cabinet to pocket to social gathering, each transition smooth, seemingly innocuous, and yet quietly shaping behavior. And there's beauty in the absurdity. People, humans at their core, are seeking calm, connection, and a touch of joy in their lives. They discover a liquid that delivers all three and marvel at its effects. At the same time, the invisible whisper of caution trails behind them, subtle, quiet, and largely ignored. You sense it hovering just at the edges of laughter, like a shadow stretching in the late afternoon sun. As evening approaches, the parlor grows calm. The man leans back in his chair, eyes half closed, content, lulled by the gentle euphoria coursing through him. Outside, the world continues its noisy rhythm, unaware of the quiet transformation occurring in small parlors and social gatherings. The line between medicine and pleasure has softened, and a new chapter in the history of heroin quietly unfolds. And in that calm, warm light, you can almost drift off, imagining society experimenting with a substance that promises both relief and delight, entirely unaware that its gentle, golden thread is beginning to weave itself into the fabric of daily life. Softly, subtly, persistently, and absurdly, step into a dimly lit military infirmary somewhere during the early 20th century. The air smells faintly of gun oil, damp wool, and medicinal syrups that promise relief from coughs, injuries, and the faint existential dread of soldiering. You notice small vials of heroin lined up neatly on a shelf, each labeled with precise handwriting, almost politely whispering, "I am here to help." You observe the medics moving among rows of weary soldiers. Their uniforms are dusty, buttons tarnished, boots scuffed, and their eyes carry the weight of long marches, cold nights, and endless drills. A medic holds a tiny spoon filled with syrup and hands it to a coughing soldier. The effect is immediate and soothing. The soldier's furrowed brow relaxes, his tense shoulders loosen, and he exhales a long, grateful breath that seems to carry away days of fatigue in a single sigh. The calm spreads quickly. Soldiers who were grimacing with pain now lean back against their bunks, eyelids drooping with drowsy contentment. You notice the absurdity of it all: war, discipline, strategy, all temporarily suspended by a small golden vial that makes life just a little more bearable. Heroin is at once a medic's tool and an unintentional social lubricant, quietly weaving comfort into the rigid structure of military life. Outside the infirmary, the barracks bustle with the clatter of boots, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional shout from a sergeant whose voice carries like distant thunder. Inside, however, time slows. The sweet, thick syrup transforms the atmosphere into one of calm, almost dreamlike stillness. Even the faint metallic tang of the medical instruments seems softened, almost polite, under the gentle influence of the drug. You wander through the rows, noticing small vials being carefully measured for minor injuries, coughs, and sleeplessness. There's a rhythm to the process, almost ritualistic: pour, administer, watch, repeat. Soldiers nod politely, perhaps with a hint of confusion, perhaps with quiet appreciation. They don't yet realize that what brings immediate relief could quietly demand more attention over time. The officers observe from a distance, some curious, others skeptical. But the subtle irony isn't lost. A drug initially marketed as a medical wonder is quietly becoming a staple of military routine, shaping morale, easing pain, and smoothing the rough edges of discipline. You can almost hear the tiny whisper of history saying, "Useful and quietly insistent." You step outside the infirmary window and notice the faint glow of sunset on the parade grounds. Soldiers move in formation, rifles resting on shoulders, while some, still under the influence of their tiny doses, walk a little lighter, smile a little more easily, and dream of home just a little sooner. The syrup, golden and deceptively simple, has woven a subtle thread of calm through a world defined by order, discipline, and occasional chaos. And there's something oddly comforting in this absurdity. Heroin is neither entirely good nor entirely bad here. It's practical, immediate, and deceptively gentle. It soothes the weary body, calms the anxious mind, and makes life just a little more tolerable in a world defined by the constant tension of drills, duties, and danger. As evening settles over the barracks, the medic closes the vials, The soldiers drift toward restful sleep, and the faint scent of syrup lingers like a quiet lullaby. You can almost drift off, imagining a world where tiny golden bottles quietly shape lives, ease burdens, and bring calm, all while softly hinting at the subtle persistence of dependence yet to come. Step into a factory floor around the early 1900s. The air is thick with the scent of coal smoke, hot metal, and the faintly acrid tang of machinery lubricants. Steam hisses from pipes overhead, and the rhythmic clanging of metal echoes like a strangely hypnotic heartbeat. Workers, faces streaked with soot, move in synchronized precision, carrying out repetitive tasks with tired but practiced hands. On a small shelf near the foreman's office sits a row of tiny vials labeled heroin for relief and calm. You watch a worker reach for a spoonful of syrup during a short break. The liquid is thick, sweet, and promises a temporary escape from the relentless monotony of assembly lines and spinning gears. One sip, and the shoulders relax, the jaw unclenches, and a gentle warmth spreads through the body, like sinking into a soft chair after a day of hard labor. The factory floor seems a little less harsh, the metal a little less unforgiving. You notice the subtle ritual forming among the workers. Tiny doses are shared quietly during breaks, a small rebellion against the grind. Heroin becomes a companion in the repetitive cadence of industrial life, offering a moment of calm, a fleeting respite from the unending rhythm of machines. The clatter of looms, presses, and hammers continues around them, but within their minds, there is a gentle, dreamlike calm. Outside, the city hums with the noises of progress. Carriages, street vendors, and distant whistles from other factories. Inside, however, a small golden thread of relief weaves through the worker's day. The syrup does its job perfectly, quieting aches, easing fatigue, and offering a faint glimmer of pleasure in the midst of toil. It's practical, discreet, and, if you squint, almost beautiful in its absurdity. You wander past the foreman, who glances at the small vials with approval, perhaps unaware of the subtle dependence quietly forming among the workforce. The substance is both a tool and a temptation. It soothes and pacifies, making the long, grueling hours slightly more bearable while quietly asking for more attention tomorrow, the next day, the next week. You notice a young woman working at a spinning machine. Her hands move with precise rhythm, but every so often, she pauses to sip from her vial. Relief washes over her, muscles unclench, and her eyes soften. She smiles faintly at a coworker, sharing the silent, almost conspiratorial bond of those who had discovered the golden thread in their daily grind. It's a tiny act of rebellion wrapped in a comforting illusion. And yet, the subtle tension is never far away. The factory, with all its relentless machinery and rigid schedules, hums a quiet warning. Dependence creeps in softly, persistently, almost politely, while the workers enjoy the calm it brings. Heroin, once a miracle for coughs or teething, has found a new stage, the industrial age, where fatigue is constant and relief is fleeting. As the day drifts toward evening, the machinery slows, the workers stretch, and the faint glow of sunset filters through soot-streaked windows. The golden syrup has done its quiet work. Muscles relax, minds soften, and the relentless rhythm of industrial life is made just a little more bearable. You step back, observing the absurdity, the practicality, and the gentle, persistent irony of it all. And in that quiet, warm light, you can almost drift off, lulled by the absurdity of progress, the faint sweetness of relief, and the subtle whisper of dependence weaving its way through the rhythm of an industrial world. Step into a sunlit middle-class parlor around 1910. Lace curtains sway gently, the faint aroma of polished wood and boiled coffee drifting through the room. Children play quietly on the rug, their soft giggles occasionally punctuated by the gentle hiss of a kettle. On a small side table sits a modest bottle labeled heroin, safe and soothing, a tiny golden promise resting amid doilies and neatly stacked books. You notice the mother, impeccably dressed in a high-necked blouse, moving toward the table. Her day has been long, preparing breakfast, managing laundry, managing children, managing herself. With a practiced hand, she pours a small teaspoon of the syrup, giving it to her youngest child. Instantly, the cough softens, the wails subside, and the child drifts into an almost dreamlike calm. Relief washes over the mother in waves, her tense shoulders relaxing as if the syrup's warmth flows through her own muscles as well. You step back and observe the subtle rituals of the middle-class household. Tiny doses of heroin are given for coughs, minor aches, sleeplessness, and even mild melancholy. The syrup becomes more than medicine. It is comfort in liquid form, a gentle way to keep the household orderly, calm, and socially presentable. You notice the faint absurdity, a household relying on a drug to maintain civility, poise, and soft smiles. The father reads the newspaper nearby, oblivious to the tiny golden vial shaping the day's rhythm. Headlines tout progress and prosperity, while a spoonful of heroin quietly smooths the minor irritations of domestic life. Outside, the city hums with carriage wheels, vendors' calls, and the occasional laughter of children in the streets. Inside, the house is calm, orderly, and almost dreamlike, temporarily immune to the chaos of the outside world. You wander further, noticing how the syrup affects more than just the children. A small sip for the mother eases tension. A minor dose for a headache offers relief, and suddenly the household feels lighter, happier, more compliant with the gentle demands of social expectation. Heroin has become a quiet partner in domestic management, a golden thread of calm that ties the family together in ways that are both practical and subtly absurd. Yet, if you look closely, there's a shadow beneath the calm. The relief is immediate, beautiful, and almost miraculous, but the faint pull of dependence begins to weave itself through the household's daily rhythm. Doses are administered more routinely. Expectations adjust to the presence of the drug, and subtle reliance begins its gentle, invisible work. The household doesn't notice at first, lulled by the quiet euphoria and the smooth running of daily life. The afternoon light softens across the polished floors, highlighting the stillness of the room, the faint stickiness of the syrup on the table, and the soft breathing of children in dreamlike calm. You step back, appreciating the irony and humanity of it all. The middle class, seeking order, comfort, and civility, has embraced a tiny golden miracle that quietly demands more than anyone realizes. And in that soft, sunlit calm, you can almost drift off, lulled by the absurdity, practicality, and quiet tension of domestic life, soothed by the faint sweetness of relief, and gently aware of the invisible thread weaving dependence into the rhythm of an orderly, early 20th century middle-class household. Step into a softly lit consultation room in the early 1900s. The walls are lined with anatomical charts, faintly floral wallpaper, and shelves holding small vials of heroin, safe and soothing. The faint aroma of medicinal syrups mixes with the distant scent of freshly brewed tea, creating a strangely comforting and domestic atmosphere. A woman sits across from the doctor, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture a combination of hope and quiet exhaustion. You notice the doctor presenting a small vial, his movements calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. For your discomfort, he says, in that reassuring tone that suggests both competence and subtle authority. The woman takes a measured spoonful, and immediately, her tension begins to soften. The aches, cramps, and fatigue of daily life melt slightly into a dreamlike haze of calm. Relief washes over her like sunlight, filtering through the morning mist, gentle and comforting. You wander through the room, observing the subtle rituals that have formed around women's health. Heroin is administered for menstrual pain, minor surgeries, sleeplessness, and the faint melancholy that seems almost expected of women in this era. It is, for them, a small miracle in liquid form, a balm that soothes both body and mind while society continues to whisper, softly, that these burdens are natural, inevitable, and quietly endured. Outside, the city hums with the rhythm of everyday life. Children play in cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages clatter past, and vendors call out their wares. Inside, however, a quiet transformation occurs. The woman leans back, eyes half closed, and the room seems to slow around her. Her breath evens, her muscles relax, and for a moment, the world is entirely gentle. Heroin is her companion, a silent helper in the intricate choreography of early 20th century domestic and societal expectations. Yet, if you look closely, a subtle tension lingers. Relief comes easily, but it comes with a gentle insistence, a quiet pull that encourages reliance. Daily rituals begin to form around the syrup. A spoonful in the morning, another in the evening, perhaps a tiny taste during particularly challenging moments. It is practical, soothing, and almost invisible in its effect, but quietly persistent. You notice the faint absurdity of it all. A society that offers comfort in vials, a medicine that is both miraculous and subtly demanding. Heroin smooths the rough edges of life, allowing women to continue managing households, children, and societal expectations with an ease that seems almost magical. And yet, beneath the calm, a faint, invisible thread of dependence begins to weave itself into daily routines, unnoticed but steadily present. As evening light softens across the room, highlighting the delicate patterns on the wallpaper and the glimmering glass of the vial, you can almost hear the quiet rhythm of life shaped by tiny doses of calm. The woman breathes evenly, her mind gently lulled, her body softened, the subtle tension of dependency hovering quietly at the edges like a polite shadow. And in that warm, muted glow, you can almost drift off, lulled by the absurdity, the practicality, and the quiet, persistent rhythm of a world where heroin promises relief, comfort, and calm, while quietly asking for more than anyone realizes. Step into a softly lit print shop around the early 1900s. The smell of ink, freshly pressed paper, and faint traces of sweet syrup lingers in the air, a strangely comforting combination. Posters and pamphlets hang from walls and drying lines, each adorned with bold letters proclaiming the wonders of heroin. Coughs vanish instantly. Relief without effort. A miracle in every drop. The advertisements sparkle with the promise of calm, comfort, and quiet euphoria. You notice the designers carefully choosing fonts and images. A serene mother, a peacefully sleeping child, a smiling father with a hint of mischief in his eyes. Every element is crafted to convey perfection, relief, and trustworthiness. The subtle irony is almost poetic, a society being gently coaxed toward dependency through the careful art of persuasion, all wrapped in syrup-colored charm. You wander closer, observing how the advertisements target everyone, from busy mothers seeking calm for fussy children to industrious workers longing for a moment of peace. Testimonials abound. My child sleeps peacefully thanks to this miracle. No more nightly aches. Each sentence is carefully structured to evoke trust, to suggest that the golden liquid is not only safe, but essential for maintaining order, health, and happiness. Outside, the streets bustle with the rhythm of daily life. Carriages rattle over cobblestones, shopkeepers call their wares, and children chase hoops down alleyways. Inside, the print shop hums with quiet energy. The rhythmic stamping of presses, the soft rustle of drying paper, the faint, sweet smell of syrup mingling with ink. The advertisements quietly make their way into society, shaping expectations, hopes, and daily routines, all while maintaining an air of gentle reassurance. You notice the subtle absurdity of it all. A drug, meant for medicinal purposes, being packaged, marketed, and sold like a sweet treat. It's alluring, persuasive, and almost playful, a delicate dance between trust and dependency. The public, eager for comfort and relief, responds enthusiastically. Heroin becomes not just a medicine, but a symbol of modernity, efficiency, and domestic calm. Yet, if you look closely, a quiet tension lingers beneath the bright headlines and smiling faces. The advertisements promise relief, but remain silent on the subtle, persistent pull that follows repeated use. Dependency creeps quietly, almost politely, behind the cheerful smiles and rosy testimonials. The public is charmed, lulled by the promise of calm, and unaware of the invisible thread weaving itself through daily life. You step back and take in the scene. The soft light filtering through windows, the glimmer of freshly printed paper, the faintly sweet scent of syrup lingering in the air. It's a gentle, absurd symphony of persuasion, optimism, and subtle risk. The advertisements are both beautiful and slightly mischievous, promising relief while quietly nudging society toward reliance. And in that warm, golden glow, you can almost drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity of marketing, the comforting promise of relief, and the quiet, persistent rhythm of a world slowly learning to trust a tiny golden vial a little too much. Step into a stately government office in the early 1910s. The air is filled with the faint smell of polished wood, ink, and a slightly ominous undertone of bureaucratic tension. Sunlight filters through tall windows, casting soft patterns on marble floors. Rows of documents and ledgers are stacked neatly, some marked heroin regulations, others whispering quietly of past mistakes. This is where society begins to notice that perhaps the tiny golden vials of relief might have consequences beyond calm households and industrious factories. You watch the officials carefully reviewing reports and testimonies. Doctors are consulted, pharmacists questioned, and journalists quietly whisper about the rising concern of heroin dependence. The room hums with a polite urgency, a mixture of discovery, panic, and faint absurdity. Here, logic and practicality collide with human fascination and historical inertia. Outside, the streets continue their usual rhythm. Children chase hoops, carriages rattle over cobblestones, and shopkeepers shout their wares. Inside the office, the mood is more subdued, yet tinged with irony. The very substance once celebrated as a miracle now faces scrutiny. Officials debate, quibble, and draft regulations that are both cautious and remarkably unsure of themselves. The handwriting is meticulous, the arguments thorough, yet the faint absurdity is hard to ignore. How do you regulate a substance everyone once praised? You wander through the scene, noticing the small tension in the air. Some pharmacists frown, reluctant to give up their lucrative vials. Some doctors protest, insisting the drug is safe when used properly. And yet, evidence mounts. Reports of dependency, subtle overuse, and quietly persistent reliance. Heroin, once a golden promise, now wears a slightly tarnished halo. The first regulations appear: restrictions on sales, labeling requirements, and cautious warnings. They are polite, measured, almost apologetic in tone, like someone quietly asking a mischievous cat to stop climbing the curtains. Society seems to agree in principle, though the transition is uneven. Some households comply dutifully, others carry on in secret, and the sweet allure of the syrup quietly resists change. You notice the subtle humor in it all. A miracle once celebrated is now policed, its power acknowledged but feared. Heroin moves through society like a mischievous guest, politely following rules in some households while ignoring them in others. Families, workers, and doctors all navigate this new landscape with a mix of compliance, denial, and curiosity. As evening settles, sunlight softens across polished desks and ink-stained papers. The faint scent of medicinal syrup lingers, a reminder that regulation is only part of the story. Heroin has already woven itself into the fabric of daily life, its presence gentle yet persistent. You can almost hear history whispering, "You may regulate me, but I will quietly remain." And in that soft, warm light, you can drift off, lulled by the absurdity, the quiet tension, and the gentle rhythm of a world slowly recognizing that miracles can come with strings attached, and that golden vials of calm are never entirely under control. Step into a softly lit parlor in the 1920s. The curtains sway gently, dust motes floating lazily in the sunlight, and the faint aroma of tea, polished wood, and a hint of medicinal syrup hangs in the air. On the table rests a small, gleaming vial of heroin, almost innocuous in appearance, yet quietly carrying the weight of society's changing perceptions. You notice the subtle shift in conversation among visitors and neighbors. Once, the golden syrup was celebrated as a miracle, a symbol of relief, calm, and modern convenience. Now, whispers drift like shadows through polite drawing rooms. Too much of that stuff. I hear dangerous, addictive, scandalous. The tone is soft, almost conspiratorial, as if acknowledging the reality of dependency requires delicacy and discretion. You wander through the scene, observing families and households navigating the invisible line between acceptability and taboo. Mothers who once administered heroin for minor ailments now do so with cautious glances, mindful of gossip and judgment. Children's occasional doses are quietly minimized, and the adults themselves adopt an air of polite restraint, hiding the golden vial behind doilies and lace while society simultaneously oscillates between fascination and fear. Outside, the city continues its familiar rhythm. Carriages clatter over cobblestones, children chase hoops, and shopkeepers call their wares. Inside, however, a quiet tension lingers. Heroin's cultural perception has shifted, creating a delicate dance between relief and shame, between practicality and stigma. The substance that once promised comfort is now a subtle marker of moral and social judgment. You notice the absurdity of it all. The same substance that soothed pain, eased coughs, and calmed restless minds is now both feared and whispered about. Conversations are carefully measured, advice is given politely, and families develop rituals not just of dosage, but of discretion. Heroin becomes a social tightrope, its effects still desired, but its use now cloaked in shadow and polite secrecy. You step closer to the small vial on the table. Its golden liquid gleams in the afternoon sunlight, quiet, persistent, and deceptively benign. The tension is subtle but present. The mixture of fascination, fear, and judgment creates an invisible layer over daily life. Households balance relief with conscience, comfort with caution, and routine with reputation. Even the medical community reflects this shift. Doctors are more cautious, publications more circumspect, and the glowing testimonials that once filled newspapers are now tempered by warnings and concern. Heroin, once celebrated openly, now carries a dual identity, miraculous and dangerous, comforting and socially risky. As the sun sets, the soft glow bathes the room in warm light. The faint scent of syrup lingers, mingling with the quiet hum of polite conversation. You can almost hear the whispers of history, reminding you that society is never entirely rational, that moral judgment can arrive slowly, and that even miracles are subject to perception, rumor, and stigma. And in that calm, gentle light, you can drift off, lulled by the subtle tension, the quiet absurdity, and the gentle rhythm of a world learning to balance relief with reputation, comfort with caution, and fascination with fear, softly, persistently, and almost politely. Step into a dimly lit artist's studio or a quiet writer's study around the 1920s. The air is filled with the faint, heady aroma of ink, paint, and a lingering sweetness of medicinal syrup. Sketches and manuscripts litter the room, some half-finished, others carefully tucked under blotters. A small, unassuming vial of heroin rests on the desk, glinting faintly in the soft light, a silent muse to those seeking escape, inspiration, or solace. You notice the writer dipping a quill into ink, glancing at the golden syrup with a combination of curiosity and reverence. A small spoonful is measured, consumed with deliberate calm. Instantly, tension eases from shoulders and jaw, and the mind drifts gently into a fluid, dreamlike state. Thoughts meander, words flow more freely, and imagination expands in soft, undulating waves. The creative process, once bounded by fatigue or frustration, now feels limitless, at least for a while. You wander around the studio, observing painters and illustrators similarly influenced. Heroin, taken in careful doses, seems to color perception with subtle shifts. shadows deepen, light softens, and ordinary objects appear infused with extraordinary meaning. A blank canvas transforms into a portal for surreal landscapes. And ordinary street scenes become layered with whispered emotion, the mundane made beautiful by a haze of gentle euphoria. Outside, the streets murmur with life. Carriages, children laughing, vendors calling their wares. Inside, however, time stretches in soft loops. Ideas unfurl. Lines of poetry spill across paper, and brushstrokes flow with an effortless grace. The artists and writers are lulled into a rhythm that is both absurdly charming and quietly productive. Heroin becomes a subtle companion in creativity, offering a temporary key to unlock doors of perception that had once seemed firmly closed. Yet, if you look closely, a quiet tension lingers. The relief, inspiration, and mental fluidity come with an invisible thread of dependence. Each creative session softens reality, but also gently nudges the user toward repeated use. The room hums with quiet irony. The very substance that expands imagination also quietly asks for loyalty, a companion as insistent as it is enticing. You notice the peculiar interplay between society and the arts. Literary magazines and galleries occasionally mention the fascination with heroin, either glamorizing or cautioning its use. Writers and artists gain fame, their works celebrated, while their private reliance remains a subtle, almost whispered part of their lives. The golden vial is both tool and secret, muse and shadow, its influence pervasive yet understated. As evening falls, the studio softens in warm, amber light. Dust motes float lazily in the air. Manuscripts curl gently on desks, and a faint, sweet scent of syrup lingers like a memory. Artists and writers lean back, pens and brushes resting, minds still gently shaped by the small golden thread weaving through their creative work. And in that soft, quiet glow, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the calming rhythm, and the delicate, persistent dance of inspiration and dependence, softly whispered into the world by a tiny, glimmering vial of heroin. Step onto a bustling port in the early 20th century. Ships creak gently in the harbor, the smell of salt water mixing with coal smoke, tar, and the faint sweetness of imported medicinal syrups. Crates marked heroin for relief and comfort are unloaded with careful precision, each box a tiny ambassador of golden calm, destined for cities and households across the globe. You wander along the docks, observing sailors, merchants, and port officials moving in synchronized chaos. The golden vials pass from hand to hand, from ship to cart, from port to pharmacy, carrying with them a promise of relief and a quiet intrigue. Across continents, people await their arrival. Doctors, mothers, and industrious workers alike, curious and hopeful about the miracle liquid that has already transformed daily life in Europe and the United States. Inside a crowded pharmacy in a faraway city, you notice a clerk carefully arranging vials on polished shelves. A mother asks for a small dose for her child's cough. A clerk nods politely, and the golden syrup is handed over with quiet reverence. You can almost hear the faint whispers of history traveling along with the vial. Relief, calm, and subtle dependency, all quietly packaged together. The spread of heroin is not just practical, but cultural. Advertisements, testimonials, and word of mouth accompany the physical transport of the drug. Each new city embraces the syrup with varying degrees of enthusiasm and caution. Some see it as a miracle, others as a curiosity, and still others begin to sense the faint, insistent pull of its subtle power. The world collectively experiments, almost politely, with a substance that promises both comfort and quiet intrigue. You notice the absurdity of it all. A tiny golden vial, easily carried, quietly shaping societies thousands of miles apart. Daily life in one country mirrors that of another. Children soothed, workers eased, households calmed, and yet everywhere, the invisible thread of reliance begins its gentle work. Heroin is at once global, personal, practical, and subtly insistent. Outside, the streets hum with energy. Carriages rattle, vendors shout, children laugh, and somewhere, a clock chimes the hour with faint authority. Inside pharmacies and homes, calm spreads, subtly altering the rhythm of life. People trust it, enjoy it, and rarely question the invisible thread weaving through daily routines. The golden vial travels easily, quietly adapting to new cultures, new routines, and new expectations. You step back and take in the scene. The sun glinting off ship rigging, the faint shimmer of syrup through glass, the distant laughter of children playing in alleyways. The global spread of heroin is both practical and absurd, a substance that began as a medicine quietly shaping daily life on multiple continents, linking people together in a shared, if unspoken, rhythm of relief and subtle dependency. And in that soft, harbor-lit glow, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the quiet rhythm of globalization, and the subtle, persistent presence of a tiny golden vial quietly weaving its way into the world, softly, persistently, and almost politely. Step into a quiet legislative chamber in the early 20th century. Sunlight filters gently through tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the air. The faint smell of polished wood, ink, and official seriousness mingles with the distant aroma of street vendors outside. Documents labeled Heroin Regulation Act are neatly stacked on tables, and legislators murmur quietly among themselves, their conversation a soft symphony of concern, curiosity, and mild exasperation. You observe the debate unfold. Some officials are convinced that regulation is necessary. The golden syrup, once praised as a miracle, has quietly shown its potential for dependence. Others argue that it's still a medicine, a friend to the weary, a balm for coughs and sleepless nights. The room hums with polite tension, a dance of logic and human curiosity, each voice measured, each gesture carefully considered. Outside, the city continues its familiar rhythm. Carriages clatter over cobblestones, children laugh in alleyways, and shopkeepers call their wares. Inside, however, time slows, as if the chamber itself is pausing to weigh the morality, practicality, and absurdity of legislating something so small yet so influential. You notice the faint humor in it all. Lawmakers arguing seriously about tiny golden vials that have already infiltrated homes, factories, and hospitals across the nation. You wander through the chamber, observing how the first laws attempt balance. Restrictions are introduced, tighter control on sales, labeling requirements, and limits on distribution. The tone is cautious, almost apologetic, as if the legislators are politely asking the vials to cooperate. Pharmacists and doctors are given new rules to follow. Households are expected to comply, and the public is informed that miracles, it seems, must now operate under polite supervision. The irony is gentle but persistent. Heroin, celebrated as a marvel just decades earlier, is now the subject of careful scrutiny, its golden allure tempered by the shadow of regulation. Families who relied on it for relief navigate new rules with subtle adaptation. Doses measured more cautiously, storage more discreet, rituals slightly modified. The substance itself remains unchanged, calm and golden, quietly asserting its influence while the world debates its limits. You notice the subtle absurdity of history, society regulating something that had already woven itself into daily life. Children are soothed, workers eased, and households calmed, all under the polite watch of new legislation. The laws are formal, meticulous, and deliberate, yet they cannot fully capture the invisible thread of dependence quietly persisting behind polite smiles and orderly routines. As evening light softens across the polished desks and ink-stained papers, the chamber empties. The faint scent of medicinal syrup lingers, a reminder that regulation is part of the story, but not the whole story. The golden vials remain, quietly influential, softly persistent, and gently absurd in their enduring presence. And in that calm, golden glow, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the quiet rhythm of regulation, and the subtle, persistent presence of a tiny golden vial that, no matter the rules, continues to quietly shape daily life, softly, persistently, and almost politely. Step into a smoky jazz club in the heart of the 1920s. The soft glow of lamps casts golden circles on polished wood floors, and the faint scent of cigarette smoke mingles with perfume, spilled cocktails, and a subtle sweetness of medicinal syrup hidden in tiny vials. The air hums with muted saxophones, soft laughter, and the occasional clink of glassware, creating a rhythm both intoxicating and oddly soothing. You notice a young man seated at a corner table, top hat slightly askew, sipping from a small spoonful of heroin. Instantly, the tension in his shoulders eases, his eyelids grow heavy, and the world softens around him like velvet draped over sharp edges. The music feels warmer, the chatter gentler, and even the shadows in the club seem to sway with a polite calm. You wander through the scene, observing others embracing the golden thread of calm. Women in flapper dresses laugh more freely. Men tap their feet without worry, and the overall energy feels lighter, dreamlike, and slightly mischievous. Heroin, once a purely medicinal tool, has now become part of social life. A secret companion in dance halls, speakeasies, and private gatherings, offering brief respite from the roaring chaos of the decade. Outside, the city buzzes with automobile engines, streetlights flickering, and distant jazz spilling from open windows. Inside the club, however, time seems to bend gently. Conversations flow effortlessly, movements glide smoothly, and the faint, sweet scent of the syrup drifts like a subtle perfume over the patrons, blending with the music in an almost hypnotic rhythm. You notice the subtle irony. A drug originally marketed for coughs and aches now provides comfort, calm, and social lubrication in the midst of speakeasy revelry. The golden vial quietly shapes behavior, softening tensions, easing social anxieties, and allowing people to enjoy the frenzy of modern life with a gentle, dreamlike detachment. Yet, if you look closely, a quiet tension lurks at the edges. Heroin's influence is soothing, almost seductive, and its invisible thread of reliance subtly weaves through the excitement of the decade. Patrons may sip discreetly, believing it a harmless indulgence, while the substance quietly encourages repetition, softening the edges of exuberance with subtle persistence. You step closer to the bar, noticing tiny vials discreetly placed behind bottles of gin and whiskey. The bartender pours drinks with casual charm, aware of the hidden golden syrup quietly shaping the mood of the room. Laughter, music, and calm intermingle, creating a surreal yet comforting tapestry of sensations that is both absurd and enchanting. As evening deepens, the club's glow softens, the music slows, and patrons lean back in chairs, eyelids heavy, minds softened by the gentle euphoria of golden syrup. Outside, the city lights twinkle like distant stars, indifferent to the subtle influence of tiny vials shaping social life within. And in that warm, golden haze, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the soft rhythm of jazz and laughter, and the subtle, persistent presence of heroin quietly threading itself through the vibrant pulse of the roaring 20s, softly, persistently, and almost politely. Step into a quiet city apartment in the late 1940s, just after the chaos of World War II has settled into uneasy normalcy. The faint scent of soot lingers from distant bombed-out buildings, mingling with the aroma of home-cooked meals, fresh laundry, and a subtle sweetness from tiny vials of heroin resting carefully on a side table. Outside, the streets are slowly rebuilding, children playing amidst the hum of reconstruction, while inside, a quiet calm begins to take hold. You notice a young veteran sitting in an armchair, uniform sleeves rolled up, shoulders tense from years of marching, combat, and the relentless rhythm of war. He dips a spoon into the small vial of heroin and consumes a measured dose. Almost immediately, the tension in his muscles melts away, his heartbeat slows, and the world around him softens into a warm, amber haze. The echoes of conflict retreat, replaced by a gentle, dreamlike calm. You wander around the room, observing the subtle rituals forming in post-war households. Heroin is now quietly used for relief from pain, insomnia, and the lingering anxiety of life after conflict. Families administer it cautiously, aware of its power, yet appreciating its immediate comfort. Children are soothed, parents calmed, and the invisible thread of calm weaves itself gently through the rebuilding of domestic life. Outside, the city hums with a delicate, hopeful energy. Hammers tap on scaffolding, shopkeepers restock shelves, and neighbors exchange quiet greetings. Inside, the golden syrup continues its work softly, offering relief and distraction from the memories of war and the stresses of reconstruction. There's a subtle absurdity to it. Society leans on a tiny golden vial to help stitch itself back together, softly, persistently, and almost politely. You notice the quiet interplay between relief and dependence. Heroin soothes, eases, and comforts, yet it also quietly encourages repetition. Veterans and civilians alike find themselves drawn into its calm embrace, appreciating the temporary detachment it provides from both physical pain and the faint, lingering shadows of trauma. The substance is at once practical, comforting, and subtly demanding, quietly shaping daily life in ways almost invisible but deeply felt. In the soft glow of the apartment, the faint scent of syrup mingles with tea and polished wood. The veteran leans back, eyes half closed, feeling the gentle rhythm of relief flowing through him. Across the room, the faint hum of conversation, the soft shuffle of feet, and the muted laughter of children form a soothing backdrop, blending with the quiet influence of the tiny golden vial. And in that warm, post-war glow, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the comforting rhythm of calm, and the subtle, persistent presence of heroin quietly threading itself through the slow rebuilding of lives, softly, persistently, and almost politely. Step into a dimly lit apartment in the 1960s. The walls are covered with faded posters. Incense smoke curls lazily in the air, and the faint sound of distant sitars and folk guitars drifts through the windows. On a small, cluttered table lies a tiny vial of heroin, its golden liquid glinting softly in the warm haze of the room. This is a space where rebellion, curiosity, and a quest for altered experience quietly converge. You notice a young artist reclining on a threadbare couch, a notebook balanced on their knees. They measure a small spoonful of heroin, consume it carefully, and exhale with a sigh that seems to carry away the weight of social expectation, mundane routine, and the faintly oppressive world outside. The room softens, colors deepen, and time seems to stretch into a slow, velvety rhythm. You wander through the apartment, observing the subtle rituals of countercultural life. Heroin is used cautiously, sometimes experimentally, sometimes for comfort. Conversations meander like slow rivers. Ideas are exchanged freely, and the faint euphoria from the golden syrup softens both tension and judgment. It is, in a way, a gentle rebellion, a tiny vial quietly disrupting expectations, offering calm, and reshaping perception without fanfare. Outside, the city hums with protest marches, car horns, and the occasional motorcycle roar. Inside, however, the world has slowed. The golden syrup threads a delicate, invisible influence through the room, easing nerves, inspiring thought, and offering a quiet detachment from social constraints. Heroin, once a medical marvel, has quietly become a companion for exploration, introspection, and soft rebellion. You notice the subtle absurdity of it all, a substance with a long history of domestic, medical, and industrial use now quietly shaping the consciousness of artists, musicians, and dreamers. The golden vial hums softly in the background of psychedelic carpets and incense clouds, its influence gentle yet persistent. Ideas bloom, words flow, and the faint pull of reliance begins to make itself known, softly and almost politely. In a corner, a small group laughs quietly, sharing stories music, and faintly sweetened sips of relief. The social dynamic is relaxed, the energy mellow, and the golden syrup hums its quiet, consistent rhythm through the evening. It is both a facilitator of calm and a subtle reminder of the persistent thread of history, the way a tiny golden vial quietly shapes lives across generations. As night deepens, the soft glow of lamps and candlelight bathes the room, dust motes floating lazily in the air. Conversations soften, eyelids droop, and the subtle, persistent presence of heroin continues its gentle influence. Outside, the city sleeps unevenly, but inside, the room holds a quiet, almost sacred calm. And in that warm, hazy glow, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the soft rhythm of creativity and calm, and the subtle, persistent presence of heroin quietly threading itself through countercultural life, softly, persistently, and almost politely. Step into a fluorescent-lit government office in the late 20th century. The air hums with the faint scent of bureaucracy, paper, toner, and a subtle, almost imperceptible anxiety. Stacks of reports, memos, and binders labeled heroin control are neatly arranged on polished desks. Outside, city streets pulse with life. Cars, neon signs, chatter, but inside, a quiet storm of policy and rhetoric quietly unfolds. You observe the scene as officials debate, type, and shuffle papers with precision. Heroin, once a golden marvel, has now become a target of societal anxiety, legal scrutiny, and political urgency. The room buzzes with a polite tension. Statistics are cited, warnings repeated, and the language is precise, almost ceremonious. It's a world attempting to corral history itself, to legislate calm and chaos simultaneously. Outside, neighborhoods continue their hum. Children play, vendors call out their wares, and the distant pulse of nightlife ebbs and flows. Inside, however, policy takes the spotlight. Heroin is no longer a domestic helper or cultural companion. It has become a villain in print, a subject of fear, and a substance whose golden promise is overshadowed by danger and stigma. You wander through the discussion, noting the subtle absurdity. Decades of history distilled into memos, headlines, and statistics. A substance that once soothed aches, calmed households, and inspired artists is now framed as a societal threat. Its past quietly obscured by urgency and policy. The invisible thread of dependence is now politicized, debated, and sometimes exaggerated, while the golden vial itself, unchanged, quietly continues to exist in the shadows of human behavior. You notice the tension between public perception and private reality. Families, communities, and individuals quietly navigate both old habits and new restrictions. Dealers, users, and medical professionals all adapt in different ways, some out of necessity, some out of secrecy. Heroin's persistent presence is subtle but undeniable, threading its influence through culture even as laws attempt to contain it. The absurdity grows more evident in media portrayals. Dramatic headlines, cautionary tales, and public service announcements flood televisions and newspapers, blending fear with fascination. Yet in quiet corners, the golden vial still exists as a tool, a temptation, and a relic of a long history. Society struggles to reconcile decades of medical, cultural, and social experience with an emergent narrative of control and punishment. As evening descends, fluorescent lights dim slightly, and the office grows quieter. Papers are stacked, reports filed, and the faint scent of toner lingers in the air. Outside, life continues its irregular rhythm, indifferent to policy debates, statistics, or the faint golden glimmer of a substance that has quietly shaped human experience for over a century. And in that soft, reflective glow, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the calm persistence of history, and the subtle, persistent presence of heroin quietly threading itself through the evolving story of society. Softly, persistently, and almost politely, step into a softly lit room in the present day. The hum of city life drifts in faintly through closed windows. cars passing, distant conversations, a siren in the far distance. But inside, there is calm. A small, nondescript bottle sits on a table, a silent reminder of a substance whose journey has spanned centuries. The air smells faintly of coffee, polished surfaces, and an almost imperceptible hint of history lingering in the corners. You notice the subtle complexity of modern perception. Heroin is no longer a household helper, a cultural muse, or a casual companion. It is now framed primarily by caution, awareness, and the sobering weight of its consequences. Public health campaigns, addiction services, and educational programs quietly coexist with stories of dependence, loss, and resilience. It is a substance whose history is layered, vast, and oddly poetic in its persistence. You wander through the modern landscape, observing how society negotiates its relationship with the golden vial. Medical professionals handle opioids with precision, communities offer support for recovery, and individuals navigate daily life with an awareness that past eras could never have imagined. Heroin's presence is now both clinical and cultural, a reminder of history, human curiosity, and the fine line between relief and dependence. Outside, the city pulses with contemporary energy, neon lights, electric buses, and the chatter of smartphones. Inside, however, there is reflection. The golden thread of history weaves gently through the present day, connecting medical marvels, domestic rituals, cultural fascination, and regulatory battles across decades. Each vial, each story, is a reminder of humanity's persistent search for relief, calm, and understanding. You notice the subtle absurdity of it all. A single substance, once celebrated, regulated, stigmatized, and feared, still quietly threads through human life, shaping experience in ways both profound and gently ironic. Society balances awareness with empathy, caution with curiosity, and history with present reality, learning slowly from past missteps while striving to provide care, compassion, and understanding. In this soft, modern glow, you can reflect on the journey of heroin, from domestic medicine to cultural muse, from global commodity to political target, from taboo to contemporary cautionary tale. Its story is long, winding, and rich with human complexity, quietly reminding us of the delicate interplay between relief, reliance, and responsibility. And in this calm, reflective atmosphere, you can drift off, lulled by the gentle absurdity, the persistent rhythm of history, and the quiet, enduring presence of a substance that has threaded itself through centuries of human experience, softly, persistently, and almost politely.